Hi, my name is Zach Messenger, and today I'm going to show you how I lead small groups. So I like to start with introductions. I usually do this while we're walking to our location. It cuts out like a lot of the awkward silences. So I introduce myself with name, major, hometown, and pronouns. So for example, I would say, I'm Zach Messenger. I'm a third year English major here at Portland State. I use masculine pronouns and I'm from Eugene, Oregon. And then I would ask the group to introduce themselves. So I'd say like, hey, okay, now let's go around and let's introduce ourselves. So that's how I get introductions out of the way. When we get to our location, I like to do a small icebreaker. Last year I did 2 truths and a lie. Basically, people will go around and they'll say 3 facts about themselves, 2 will be true and 1 will be a lie. I find this is like really good to get people to know each other a little bit better and build some like group comfort. Usually you get a few people who are more reluctant to share, but I think breaking down those barriers early in the small group process is really helpful. So once we get the icebreaker out of the way, then I start talking about the student handbook. If you'll notice, I have mine sectioned off. So these are all the pages I talk about. I would recommend having a copy that you section off so you'll know where various references will be, and that'll help you in your small group. So I usually start on the first page with this picture of Wim Weevil. I think this is a good chance to talk about the transitioning president at PSU and the role that students can play in defining their education. If you don't know, Wim Weevil is going to be stepping down at the end of this academic year, so it's a time of transition at PSU, and I think you can highlight that in a really positive way in your group. The next thing I talk about is the academic calendar. I go over when Viking days are and what they are. So Viking days are after move out, but before classes start. We hold a lot of events on campus. Some of these include a drag show. We have a lip sync battle that we started last year. And this is a good chance to talk about like your own personal experiences with Viking days. Moving on, I point out the map. I tell them like how important it is to have this map handy. And so for example, I got lost a ton my freshman year. I think like for the first month I was late to all my classes because I just couldn't find them. So it's important to have the student handbook and this map handy just so you can figure out where your classes are. I then go into Viking definitions. There are a few I like to touch on. The first is advising and career services. This is a good chance to talk about the first year advising requirement and go over the first year advising hold. Also, co-requisite, because co-requisite will tie into a lot of people's different majors. I like to talk about different resources we have on campus. So for example, financial aid, the Queer Resource Center, and sometimes I'll just like explain what something is, but if I feel like students may know this going in, then I'll kind of turn it into like a little quiz, and people usually get a kick out of that. Going forward, there's a new student checklist. I just refer to this briefly and say, in your own time today, go over this, see what you've done today. A lot of these that people are going to be checking off over the course of their orientation. So for example, they will have signed in for their Odin account, they will have registered for classes. This is basically so that students can remind themselves like what they still have to do as a new student. And I'm gonna skip forward a little bit, and I talk about advising in a little bit more. The triangle are the various graduation requirements of Portland State. This includes your Bachelor of Arts / Bachelor of Science requirements, your university studies requirements, including Frank, and then your major requirements. So altogether, you need 180 credits with 72 upper division credits to graduate. So that's the advising triangle. The next thing I like to talk about is the Franken Honors College, more specifically. I'll usually ask, like, how many of you are planning on doing honors and how many of you are planning on doing university studies? Depending on the makeup of the group, I'll kind of tailor that discussion around what more students are involved in. I mostly talk about Frank. I talk about my own experience in the Frank, and then I talk about the sophomore inquiry and my own experience there and how sophomore inquiry and junior clusters relate. I don't go too in depth over this because these are first year students we're talking to, and so they're not going to be super concerned with the sophomore inquiries yet. Next thing I talk about are, sorry, I skip around a little bit. So the next thing I talk about is SHAC, Student Health and Counseling. I talk about SHAC mostly as a resource and as something that your PSU insurance pays for if you opted into that. Or more specifically, if you didn't opt out of that. I spend more time talking about counseling than I do about health. That's mostly because I feel that there is a big stigma around counseling, and I feel that small groups are a way to kind of break down that stigma. I talk about my own time in counseling, as well as other experiences with SHAC. I try to highlight positive experiences, but at the same time I try to be honest. So I think that's a really important balance that you're gonna walk as an OL, is being honest but presenting the university in a positive light. And that's something that I think this training is gonna really help you with. So the next thing I talk about are the sexual violence resources. Normally this is a pretty heavy topic, so I like to introduce it by asking people to define consent. I'll go around and, normally I think people get a lot of pieces of PSU's definition, but I like to end by presenting the definition of consent. After that, I move into talking specifically about resources. I talk about SHAC and what they offer. I talk about the Women's Resource Center. I talk about Illuminate. Really, I highlight all of the various resources that students have on campus. And I think it's really important to do so, because you never know when this information can really save someone's life. So I think what we do is very important in that regard. Finally, I move on and I talk about the transportation and parking services. I ask which students are commuters and which so I like to ask students whether they will be commuting or living on campus, and I talk about the Flex Pass. I talk about our bike hub. I talk about parking on campus and how that works. And then I just highlight a few other things. I highlight that this has a planner in it, which is pretty cool. I talk about the importance of keeping a planner, keeping track of what events you have, I then highlight the coupons in the back. Usually people get a kick out of that. And in the very back, there are stickers. So after I finish going through the notebook, I ask if anyone has any questions, and usually I field a few questions. I then finish out small groups by asking people what they're most nervous for and most excited about coming to PSU. I then, I really try to respond to those, especially the what people say they're nervous about. And I think it's a good way to like quell some of those nerves about coming to campus so it's also a really good way to just remind students that they're not alone. They're not alone in their excitement, they're not alone in their fear. A lot of what I get during that during that session is a lot of the stuff that we prepare you for with the difficult questions, activities. So it's all stuff I feel really comfortable fielding. After I finish up my small group, I walk everyone back. Normally it's a very like kind of light, kind of friendly environment. I answer any last questions that people may have, and then they start the next part of their orientation day. So I hope this helps. Have a good one.